wasallam. And many of the righteous people say that we always go through the seerah at least once a year. Go through the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, how do we study the seerah? How do we study the life of the best of creation? There are sources. Now, the sources are, first source is the Quran itself. The words of Allah. As we said, the words of Allah documented many episodes in the life of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And those, the ulama of Quran, the ulama of tafsir, they went and elaborated on those verses. And the books of tafsir, as we just mentioned, became one of the main sources in studying the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why At-Tabari? At-Tabari is a very well-referenced tafsir. When you look, when you read, when you open book of At-Tabari, sometimes it is hard to read, but because it is not only a tafsir, but it's a reference book, he would say, حَدَّثَنِي فُلَانٌ عَنْ فُلَانٍ عَنْ فُلَانٍ. That person told me upon that person. He will give you a reference how he came up with that tafsir. So the book of Tabari is a very important source. And it is filled with ahadith, and it's filled with well-authenticated stories and narrations that relate directly to the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ibn Kathir followed the same methodology of At-Tabari. So you see that repeated. Al-Jawzi is the same thing. And then you have many of the good modern tafasir that actually took a lot from those what are called Ummahat al-Tafasir, the actual root sources of tafsir. Quran itself is a source of understanding the life of the best of creation, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. From immediately, from the way he was taught in the very beginning, by his own family, by his uncle Abu Lahab. Allah revealed, تَبَّتْ يَدَا أَبِي لَهَبٍ وَتَبْ مَا أَغْنَى عَنْهُ مَالُهُ وَمَا كَسَبْ سَيَصْلَى نَارًا ذَاتَ لَهَبٍ. Allah tells us exactly how he met by his own immediate family. It goes on about the hijrah. ثاني اثنين إذ هما في الغار إذ يقول لصاحبه لا تحزن إن الله معنا. When he was one of two people in the cave and he told his friend, his companion, meaning Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, do not be saddened, Allah is with us. Goes on Al-Quran to the day of Badr, يوم الفرقان إذ التقى الجمعان. And go on to the battle of Uhud, go on to Hunayn, go on to the Fatih Mecca, Sulh al-Hudaybiyah and then Fatih Mecca. Until the very last of revelation. The Quran is an essential source of understanding the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The books of hadith are also the second important source in understanding the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In Al-Bukhari, and you will see even today as we're studying the prelude to the seerah, many references from Al-Bukhari and Muslim, the Sahih, the authentic books of the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then Musnad Ahmad, and then the books of Sunan, like At-Tirmidhi, Abu Dawood, An-Nasa'i, Ibn Majah, Tabarani, Al-Bayhaqi. All of these books are filled with hadiths that are essential in understanding the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then we go to books that are totally dedicated for this particular subject, the subject of the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If we look at the narrators of the seerah of our Prophet, there are different layers. When we look sometimes at the hadith, we say, well, the hadith is very well authenticated and it is well referenced. And be in no doubt when you read the seerah of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it was well taken care of, it was well referenced, and it was well preserved by many generations of our scholars, starting with the Sahaba of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then at-Tabi'een, the followers of those Sahaba, of the people that took special interest and had a lot of narrations, is Abdullah ibn Abbas, radiyallahu anhu wa an abi, radiyallahu anhuma, the cousin of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was praised by the Prophet himself, and he was called a person who had a tongue that is inquisitive and a mind that is absorbent of the knowledge. لسان سؤول وقلب عقول. Or that's how he described himself also. He said, how did you acquire a lot of this knowledge? He was young, very young when the Prophet ﷺ passed. Yet he lived and he died 78 after the hijrah of the Prophet. And through his life, he was Habrul Ummah. He was the scholar of this Ummah. He was a teacher that many generations took from his knowledge. Other people other Sahaba and Tabi'een that took special interest in narrating the seerah are Urwa ibn Zubayr. Urwa ibn Zubayr ibn al-Awwam radiyallahu anhuma. Another great Sahabi, son of a great Sahabi, Hawari Rasulullah Zubayr ibn al-Awwam, Urwa ibn Zubayr, who died in 94 after the Hijrah. And then of At-Tabi'een, Sa'id ibn al-Musayyab, who died in 94 after the Hijrah as well. Sa'id ibn Ubadah. Sa'id ibn Ubadah is one of the greatest Ansars, one of the elite of the Ansar, of the supporters of the Prophet in Medina. His son, Sa'id ibn Ubadah, was one of the narrators of the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. Abban ibn Uthman ibn Affan. Abban, the son of the Sahabi Uthman ibn Affan. So you see, some of the children of the greatest Sahaba took absolute interest in narrating the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And that's the first layer, the first generation. Then comes the second generation, in the second century of Islam. Of them, Wahab ibn Munabbih, who died in 114 after the hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ. Az-Zuhri, who is the Shaykh of whom? Malik ibn Anas, Imam Malik, one of his shuyukh in Medina. He was also one of the narrators of the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. Ibn Uqba, who died 140. Ibn Ishaq. Now we stop a little bit at Ibn Ishaq because he was the first person that actually collected the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ and taught the seerah, as far as we know, in an independent subject. A student of Ibn Ishaq was called Zayd al-Baka'i. Zayd al-Baka'i died 183. Zayd al-Baka'i was a teacher of a scholar known as Abdul Malik ibn Hisham. Abdul Malik ibn Hisham, who was a contemporary of which Imam? Friend of Ash-Shafi'i. Abdul Malik ibn Hisham and Ash-Shafi'i were friends, and they were close, and they were contemporaries. And Abdul Malik ibn Hisham died in 218 after the hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ, wrote a book called As-Seeratun Nabawiyyah. This is now the book that is written and documented as the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, written by a student of Muhammad ibn Ishaq, rahimahumullah ajma'in. And his book was known now simply as Seerat ibn Hisham, the seerah of Ibn Hisham, but the actual text is called As-Seeratun Nabawiyyah. Then you have Al-Waqidi. Al-Waqidi died in 207 after the hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ. Al-Waqidi had a special interest in what? In something called Al-Maghazi. Al-Maghazi is called the Kitab al-Maghazi lil-Waqidi. Al-Maghazi are the battles and the expeditions of the Prophet ﷺ. And Al-Waqidi himself narrates how the Sahaba took a special interest in relating those information of the Maghazi of the Prophet ﷺ. Then also Ibn Sa'd comes in that same generation, and he writes an excellent book called Al-Tabaqat. Al-Tabaqat is a book that also speaks of men, speaks of history, and speaks of biography. And the first two, and it's multiple volumes, and the first two full volumes were dedicated to the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. Tabaqat ibn Sa'd is also a very important book in ilm al-rijal, in understanding what is called al-jarh wa al-ta'dil, in understanding who is a thiqa and who is not, who is a trustworthy of the narrators of hadith and who is not. So you come to understand, and this is not to bore you with these names and these dates, but to understand that this seerah was well taken care of and had special position in the hearts and in the minds of the early scholars of Islam, and it reached us through their work and through their dedication, and so we understand the importance of the life of the Prophet ﷺ.